The morning my wife stood in that courtroom and told the judge I had never contributed anything meaningful to our family, that was the moment I understood why I had spent 37 years staying quiet. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just sat with my hands folded on the table in front of me and let her words settle into the room like dust. Her attorney was a sharp-dressed man named Clifford, maybe 40 years old, the kind of lawyer who wore confidence like a second suit. He nodded slowly while my wife spoke, as if every word she said was sacred testimony. My wife. I'll call her Renata because that is her name, and she has earned the right to have it attached to what she did. Stood straight back at the podium and told the judge that I had been emotionally absent for decades, that I had let our finances fall apart, that I had hidden money from her, that I had, in her exact words, checked out of this marriage long before I ever filed these papers. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Odom, listened with the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every story 100 times over. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and occasionally glanced down at the documents in front of her. I waited. I had been waiting for a long time. A little longer didn't trouble me. My name is Gerald. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a forensic financial examiner for the federal government, which is a long way of saying that I spent my career following money. Tracing where it went, documenting what it touched, building cases so airtight that defense attorneys would sometimes call my office just to ask how I'd found what I found. I retired 14 months before Renata filed for divorce. She did not know what I had been doing in that retirement. She thought I was playing golf and watching the news and slowly becoming irrelevant. That was fine with me. I had learned, over the course of a long career, that the most important work rarely looks like work at all. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got to that courtroom. Renata and I met when I was 29 and she was 26. She was beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful, not just in their features, but in their energy. The way a room reorganized itself slightly when she walked in. She was funny and quick, and she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which I always found charming rather than annoying. We got married in a small ceremony in Asheville, North Carolina, where her parents lived. My father drove up from Georgia for the weekend. My mother had passed 3 years earlier, and I remember thinking during the ceremony that she would have liked Renata, that she would have approved. Our son Daniel was born 2 years later. Our daughter Claire came along 4 years after that. I worked long hours. Federal work is not glamorous, but it is relentless, and Renata managed the household with a competence that I genuinely admired. She was organized. She was efficient. She kept the children's schedules like a military operation, never missed a school event, and somehow always had dinner on the table at a reasonable hour no matter what chaos the day had brought. I trusted her completely. That trust was not naive. It was deliberate. I had chosen her. I had watched her operate for years. I had no reason to question. The first sign that something was wrong came not from Renata directly, but from my father. My father, Raymond, was 81 years old and living in a senior community outside of Savannah. He was sharp enough. He still did the crossword every morning and could tell you the box score of any World Series game from 1965 onward. But he had a gentleness about him that made him easy to take advantage of. He trusted people. He believed that if you treated someone decently, they would treat you decently in return. Renata had always been attentive to my father. She visited him several times a year, called him on his birthday and at Christmas, sent him cards for no particular reason. He adored her. He told me once that she reminded him of my mother, which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. When I retired and had more time to visit, I started noticing small things. The first was a conversation my father and I had about a certificate of deposit he'd held for 11 years at a bank in Savannah. It had matured. He mentioned it almost in passing, the way you mention weather. Just a fact of the day. Renata helped me sort that out, he said. Moved it somewhere better. Something about higher returns. I nodded. I didn't say anything. But I went home and I thought about it for a long time. My father had never asked me for help with his finances. I had offered over the years, and he had always declined. Not because he distrusted me, but because he didn't want to be a burden. It was a generational thing. Men of his age managed their own affairs and didn't ask their children to carry the weight of it. Renata, apparently, had offered differently, and he had said yes to her. I asked him carefully what bank the new account was at. He couldn't quite remember. He waved his hand and said Renata had the paperwork, that she'd handled it all, that she was so organized about these things. I did not tell him what I was thinking. I drove home and I sat in the garage for 20 minutes before I went inside. The second sign came from Claire. Our daughter was 26 at the time, working in Charlotte, and she mentioned during a phone call that she was thinking of taking a loan from what she called the family account, something Renata had apparently set up and told both kids about. A kind of informal fund, Renata had described it, that we had designated for family needs. I had never heard of this account. I had not designated anything. I asked Claire to describe it more. She said Mom had mentioned it a few years ago, that Dad had set aside some money as a family resource, available if either of the kids needed it. It was in Mom's name for simplicity, she'd explained. Dad wanted it that way. I had never said any such thing. I kept my voice easy and light. I told Claire that sounded fine, that I'd look into the details. I asked her not to worry about it. She moved on to other topics and I listened and I answered her questions. And when we hung up, I sat very still for a long time. That night I went into the room I used as a study, closed the door, and I opened my laptop. I want to be clear about something. I did not do what I did next out of anger. Anger is a feeling I have had in my life. I am a human being, but I have never found it useful as a guide. What I felt in that moment was closer to grief. The particular grief of a person who sees something they already knew was coming, who hoped they were wrong, and who has now run out of room to hope. I started looking. I had 31 years of experience following money. I knew exactly where to look and exactly how to document what I found. I was methodical. I took my time. I told Renata I was working on a project, old habit from my work years, never explaining more than necessary, and she accepted this without curiosity, which told me something too. What I found over the following 8 months was not subtle. Renata had, over approximately 6 years, redirected over $400,000 in various ways. Some of it came from my father's accounts, 3 CDs, a savings account, a small investment portfolio he'd held since the 1990s. She had obtained his signatures on transfer documents during visits when he was tired and trusting and believed she was helping him. She had told him each time that I had reviewed everything, that I had approved, that this was all part of our planning. My father had never mentioned any of it to me because he believed I already knew. Another portion came from refinancing the equity on our house, a refinance I had technically signed because Renata had included the documents in a stack of papers she'd asked me to sign during a Sunday afternoon when I was distracted and she was efficient and I trusted her, as I had always trusted her. The family account she described to Claire was real. It had her name on it. It had been funded primarily with money from my father and from the home equity refinance. Neither Daniel nor Claire had ever actually drawn from it. It existed primarily to create the impression of a family-sanctioned fund, a paper trail that pointed away from her and toward a fiction of shared planning. I documented everything, every transaction, every date, every corresponding document. I built the case the way I had built 100 cases over my career, quietly, completely, without announcing what I was doing until the picture was whole. When it was whole, I called an attorney, not a family friend, a specialist in financial fraud and divorce litigation out of Atlanta named Marguerite. She reviewed what I brought her and she was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then she said, "Gerald, where did you work before you retired?" I told her. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "then you already know how this is going to go." I told her I did, but that I needed it to go through the proper channels. Everything documented, everything above board, nothing that could be challenged. She said that was exactly how she operated. 2 weeks later, Renata filed for divorce. I was not surprised. I think she had sensed in the preceding months that something had shifted. I was quieter than usual, which perhaps seemed strange to her. I was already quiet, so there wasn't much room to become quieter, but something in the quality of the silence had changed. I think she had decided to move first, to frame the narrative before I could. She was not wrong to be worried. She was simply too late. The petition she filed included claims that I had been financially controlling throughout our marriage, that I had withheld money from the household, that I had made major financial decisions without her knowledge or consent. It was, I had to acknowledge, a document of considerable craftsmanship. She had inverted reality so precisely that for a moment, reading it, I felt a kind of cold admiration. She had taken the exact structure of what she had done and attributed it to me. Daniel called me the evening after the papers were served. He was 33, steady, a project manager in Denver. He had always been more reserved than his sister, more like me, people said, which I took as a compliment. But on the phone that night, his voice was tight. "Dad," he said, "Mom told us what was in the filing. Is it true that you refinanced the house without telling her?" I said, "I want you to trust me for a little while longer. Can you do that?" There was a pause. Then, "How long?" "Not long," he agreed. Reluctantly, but he agreed. Claire was harder. She was 26 and she was closer to her mother, and she called me the next day with a voice that had already made up its mind. She told me she didn't understand how I could have done what Mom said I did. She said she was disappointed. I told her I loved her. She said that wasn't what she was asking. I told her again, and then I let her be angry. There was nothing else I could give her in that moment that would have been more honest. In the months leading up to the hearing, Renata's attorney, Clifford, made several attempts to negotiate a settlement. Each offer was structured in a way that would have required me to acknowledge the substance of her claims, which I would not do. Marguerite advised me to hold. I held. My father called me once during this period. He had heard from Renata that we were divorcing. She had told him, apparently with great sadness, that I had made some financial decisions that had caused problems. He didn't understand the details. He was 81, and he loved us both, and the idea that something had broken between us upset him deeply. I drove to Savannah. I sat with him at his kitchen table, and I explained as gently and completely as I could what had happened to his money. I showed him documents. I did not perform emotion. I did not ask him to be angry on my behalf. I just showed him the facts. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. He looked at his hands. "She told me you knew," he said. "I know," I said. "I know," I said. "I didn't." He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "I should have called you." I put my hand on his arm and told him it wasn't his fault, that it had been done carefully, that a person who has spent their whole life trusting people should not be blamed for continuing to trust. He nodded slowly. Then he asked what he could do. I told him I just needed him to be available to tell the truth when asked. He said that was the one thing he had always known how to do. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in October. The courthouse was in the kind of mid-sized Georgia city where the oak trees are older than the buildings and the air smells like pine even in the middle of town. Marguerite and I arrived early. We arranged our documents. We were ready. Renata arrived with Clifford and 2 associates and the energy of a person who had already decided how the day was going to go. She was first to speak. She laid out her narrative with polish and precision, the controlling husband, the hidden accounts, the decisions made without consultation. She described me as a man who had used his professional expertise to obscure financial activity from his own family. She was calm. She was credible sounding. She had clearly rehearsed. Then she said it. "He has contributed nothing to this marriage that wasn't on his own terms," she said, her voice steady and final. "He was a useless partner. He was absent when it mattered. Everything I built for this family, I built myself." The room was quiet. I did not move. Judge Odom made a small note on the pad in front of her. She looked up at me briefly, just a glance, the kind that doesn't mean anything until later, and then she turned to Clifford. "Counselor," she said, "your client is making significant claims about financial misconduct on the part of the respondent. I want to make sure I understand the scope. Are you prepared to substantiate the specific account activity referenced in the original petition?" Clifford straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. We have documentation of." "Before you continue," the judge said, "I want to ask a clarifying question." She paused. She looked again toward our table, at me specifically, and her expression was careful and neutral and entirely unreadable. "Mr. Gerald," she said, "the documentation submitted by the respondent's team. I've reviewed it and I have some questions about the sourcing. Before we proceed, could you please state for the record your professional background?" Clifford stopped. I saw Renata's eyes move to him. I kept mine on the judge. "Certainly, Your Honor," I said. "I spent 31 years as a forensic financial examiner with the federal government. I specialized in fraud detection, financial document analysis, and the reconstruction of complex transaction histories." The room didn't make a sound. Judge Odom removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. "And the documentation your counsel has submitted," she said, looking at Marguerite now, "is this your work?" Marguerite said, "It was prepared under Mr. Gerald's direct guidance." Your Honor, and independently verified by a certified forensic accounting firm in Atlanta. The judge looked back at Clifford. Counselor, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not unkind but was also not warm. You really were unaware of your opposing party's professional background when you filed these claims? Clifford's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced at Renata. She had gone very still. We were aware he had worked for the federal government, Your Honor, but the specific, because, Judge Odom continued, as if he hadn't spoken. What I'm looking at here is a set of financial claims made against a man who spent 3 decades professionally investigating exactly this kind of financial activity. And I'm also looking at a counter-filing the documents in considerable detail, a pattern of transactions that appear to originate not with the respondent, but with the petitioner. She picked up her glasses again, put them back on. I think we need to slow down, she said. What followed over the next 4 hours was the methodical unraveling of everything Renata had built. Marguerite walked the court through the documentation, transaction by transaction, date by date. My father's CDs, the savings account, the investment portfolio he'd held since he was 50 years old, the refinance documents with my signature, obtained, Marguerite noted carefully, under circumstances that would need to be examined more closely by the relevant authorities, the family account. The 6-year timeline. Clifford objected several times. The judge overruled him each time, patiently and without drama. Renata sat very straight. Her face had lost the confident color it had when she walked in. Near the end of the afternoon, Judge Odom called a recess. During the break, Clifford requested a private conference with Marguerite. I sat alone at our table, and I looked out the window at the oak trees in the parking lot, and I thought about my father at his kitchen table, looking at his hands. When Marguerite came back, she sat down next to me and spoke quietly. He wants to discuss terms, she said. I told her I had terms. I had prepared them months ago. I handed her the folder. She looked through it and nodded. This is reasonable, she said. More than reasonable. I told her it wasn't about being reasonable. It was about being accurate. When we reconvened, Judge Odom made clear that given the documentation before the court, the original petition's claims lacked foundation and would not proceed as filed. She referred the matter of my father's financial accounts to the State Attorney General's office for review. She noted that the home equity documents would require separate legal scrutiny. She looked at Renata directly. I want to be clear, the judge said, that this court takes allegations of financial misconduct very seriously in all directions. The record in this matter will reflect what has been presented today. Renata said nothing. Her attorney said nothing. On the drive home, I called my son. It's over, I said. I'll explain everything this weekend. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Dad, I should have. You don't need to, I told him. I understood. He drove down from Denver that Saturday. We sat on the back porch with coffee, and I walked him through everything, the whole picture, from the first conversation with my father about the CD to the final documents Marguerite had filed. He listened without interrupting. At the end, he was quiet for a long time. She told us you were controlling, he said. She said you'd always done this. I know what she told you. I should have come to you first. I shook my head. She's your mother. What you felt was natural. He looked at me first. I shook my head. She's your mother. What you felt was natural. He looked at me. How did you stay so calm through all of it? I thought about it for a moment. Because I knew what I had, I said. When you know the truth of something, you don't have to perform certainty. You just carry it. Claire took longer. She called me 3 weeks after the hearing, after she'd spoken with her brother and then with my father. She cried on the phone. She said she was sorry for the things she'd said. She said she didn't know how to process the fact that the version of me she'd been given was so different from who I actually was. I told her that the version of me she'd been given wasn't entirely false. I had been absent in some ways. I had worked too much for too many years. I had let Renata manage things I should have been present for. There was truth in the criticism, even when it came from a dishonest place. She said, "But you didn't do what she said you did." No, I told her, I didn't do that. She asked if she could come home for Thanksgiving. I said that would mean more to me than she knew. My father's accounts are still being sorted out. The Attorney General's office is doing its work, and I try not to follow it too closely. That is their job now, not mine. And I spent a long career doing that job. And I am done. What I want for my father is that he recovers what he can, and that the last years of his life are not shadowed by this. He is 81, and he still does the crossword every morning. And he told me last week that he taught one of the other residents at his community how to play gin rummy. He sounded like himself. That was enough. People sometimes ask me, friends, neighbors, my son, why I didn't say something sooner. Why I didn't confront Renata the moment I started finding things. Why I stayed quiet for 8 months while I built the documentation. Why, when she stood in that courtroom and called me useless, I didn't react. I used to try to explain this in terms of strategy, that a premature confrontation would have given her time to obscure the trail, that the evidence needed to be complete before any of it meant anything. All of that is true, but that's not the whole answer. The whole answer is simpler and harder to articulate. It is that I have never believed noise was a reliable measure of strength. I have known loud people who had nothing. I have known quiet people who were carrying entire worlds without ever announcing the weight. I spent 31 years in a profession that required me to be patient, long past the point where impatience would have felt good. And what I found, what I keep finding, is that the truth doesn't need your help to be true. It just needs enough time. Renata needed me to react. She needed me to shout or defend or stumble. My silence made her nervous, and her nervousness made her move too fast, and her moving too fast made her careless about what she'd built. I didn't plan for that specifically. I just knew who I was, and I waited. My daughter came home for Thanksgiving. She helped me make pie, something her grandmother used to make, an old recipe I'd pulled out of a box from the attic. She stood at the counter rolling dough and asking me questions about when I was young, about her grandmother, about what her grandfather was like as a father. We talked for 3 hours while the turkey rested and the house smelled like cinnamon. At some point she said very quietly, "I'm glad I came." I told her I was too. There is a thing that happens when you've been through something like this. People expect you to be changed by it, to be angrier or sadder or more closed off or more hardened in some visible way. They look at you for evidence of damage. I don't know what they find when they look at me. What I know is that I drive to Savannah twice a month now. I sit with my father and we do the crossword together, and he beats me more often than I would like. I talk to my son every Sunday. I am learning, at 63, to make the kind of pie that my mother made and that my daughter now knows how to make too. I was quiet in that courtroom. I am quiet now. Some people will always read that as emptiness. They will think that a man who does not shout must have nothing worth saying. Let them. Paper remembers. Truth waits, and the people I love know where to find me.